Welcome to Yes You Can Ask That with Tony Wilson, brought to you by Moreton Bay Region Libraries. We sat down with Tony to ask a few questions. Question 1. You have written books for adults and children. Which are harder to write for?
Hi, it's Tony. First question. Is it easier to write for children or adults? Well, it's different in some respects. The most notable is that the length of the work for children is usually different than the length of the work for adults. So, for example, my first novel for adults was Players, and it's 102,000 words long. And my second novel, Making News, was 102,000. And this one here, 1989, The Great Grand Final, I think is 65,000 words long. So there's just a length to an adult book that is sometimes daunting. But the principles behind storytelling actually don't differ that much between the two forms. So even though my children's books, Hickory Dickory Dash, that'd be 450 words. And I think the Emperor's New Clothes Horse is probably about 600 words. And so there's maybe a perception that it's easier to write for children because you can just kind of get the words down quicker. And in fact, if I'm trying to write a book for adults, I'll sometimes aim to write about 1,000 words per day. So that's effectively the length of a children's book times 2 per day. And yet there are difficulties associated with the kids' art form that I think are underestimated. In fact, it's a common joke for us kids' book authors that everyone thinks they can write a kids' book. So that, in fact, we have a drinks group, a Facebook group where kids authors catch up. And the name of the group is Because Writing Children's Books is Easy. So you could say there's a little chip on the shoulder that goes with being a kid's author because we're forever being swamped by friends and colleagues and even just members of the general public who say, oh, I'll send you my brilliant work of art. It's coming your way shortly because the children's book is so easy. And I guess everyone thinks they've got a talking fox or a hilarious camel that's going to take the world by storm. And so we're forever fending off manuscripts from people who think that they're going to be the next Dr. Seuss or the next great giant of children's literature. And yet the principles of writing, the story principles of an initiating incident, tension, a problem for the character to solve, story trajectory, a climax, a conclusion, all those things that are important in adult literature, they're actually just as important in children's literature. And sometimes when you're trying to pack it down to 500 or 600 words, it actually almost becomes more important to have those essential ingredients delivered really economically and really effectively. And so even though they're short, they have to pack a real punch. And so whilst I'd say that for me, writing adults' books is more difficult and more challenging because just of the sheer discipline required of producing so many words over such a long period of time, I've found that to be more difficult. And in some respects, I've been blessed with kids writing in the sense that I feel rhyme and rhythm comes easily to me. So I don't have to sweat to the same extent that maybe some people do when it comes to finding rhyming words and rhythms. Maybe it's to do with my obsession with various books as a kid, especially Roald Dahl's Revolting Rhymes, which I read over and over and learned to recite. I was also really into memorizing songs, and I think there's a correlation between the beats and the rhymes in songs as there is in pieces of rhyming picture books. So to some extent, I don't feel like I have to sweat too hard writing a kid's book rhyme. I have to sweat harder on the idea. So the most daunting and most difficult part of writing a picture book or a kid's book is to find an idea that will resonate with the audience. And so, if I can write 1,000 words a day for adults, effectively I should be able to write 2 kids' books a day, right? If I'm doing the picture books of 500 word length. And yet it's kind of like a bolt when you get hit with the idea that's going to work. So, Emo the Emu, I remember where I was when I thought, a grumpy emu going on a tour around Australia with Katie the kangaroo. That'll work, and I write it down, and so the ideas are rare. So you can't just punch out a picture book or a kid's book every week. And so they're really precious when you find one. The same way as when you get an idea for a long form adult book as well. It's a really precious thing, and that's really the hardest part of being an author on both sides. How do we get that good idea? So to sum up, I'd say the discipline and length of an adult book I find the most challenging part of writing, but there is an underrated element to how difficult writing a picture book is.
Question 2. What was the process and how did it feel to have 2 books selected for National Simultaneous Storytime?
I think the biggest thrill of my picture book writing life has been being picked as the National Simultaneous Storytime title. And that happened in 2016. I got the call that this one, The Cow Tripped Over the Moon, was going to be the title for that year. That one's illustrated by Laura Wood, and it's just an immediate boon for your title. So the fact that, that year it was 686,000 kids sit down at the same time and read my book or our book, Laura and my book. It's just amazing, and there's a real sense of occasion about it. I was getting videos where the chief scientist in Canberra is reading the book, and Lee Lin Chin's got a full room of kids in front of her, the SBS news reader, and I probably got 50 or 100 photos from around Australia of people just reading my book and acting out my book. There were little plays put on by teachers and craft projects. I received these pictures of how people had decked out their library with just full of cows and moons and moon jumps and dishes and spoons and laughing dogs. It was just a great time to be an author, because a lot of being an author is being locked away, or at least shut away in a room, trying to produce something and trying to do your words. And so the fun parts, I guess, for someone like me who does actually like being around people, are to get out there and read to kids and see kids enjoying the stories. And so The Cow Tripped Over the Moon was the first thrill. And actually one of the really great parts of it was the reader of The Cow Tripped Over the Moon on Storybox Library for National Simultaneous Storytime was Eddie Perfect, the Broadway writer and actor and star, and he just did a fantastic job with it. And so and actually The Cow Tripped Over the Moon then got turned into a show itself. It became a show called Yo Diddle Diddle at the put on by a company called the Patch Theatre Company in Adelaide. So all these good things happened to The Cow Tripped Over the Moon, and I think a lot of them started with it being picked as the National Simultaneous Storytime book for 2017, which is when the event occurred. And a few months later, I was speaking to the woman, Sharon, who was the liaison at Scholastic, who'd been very much the organiser of things at our end, about how great it had been. And, we'd had sales of cow. And I said, I don't suppose you want my next one. You can have that too, And she said, well, it just worked really well and you boosted the numbers. We went up from 300,000 participants in 2016 to over 600,000 in 2017. And she said, look, ALIA are really happy with you. Why don't you submit your next title? And so I did. I sent in Hickory Dickory Dash. And even before it was picked as, even before it had been published, Hickory Dickory Dash, I got the call from Sharon saying, they're going to do it. ALIA are going to do it. And you're the 2018 title as well, and that was this one. And I think what had happened was that ALIA had decided to make National Simultaneous Storytime a Trans-Tasman event in 2018. So for the first time, New Zealand were involved. And so in order to try to make it as successful and as big as possible, they'd seen that the numbers had doubled in 2017 and that this sort of rhyming familiarity of my nursery story backstories kind of worked, my nursery rhyme backstories. And so they gave me the gig again, which is ridiculous. And I sometimes think a little unfair because it is such a boost to an author. And I can understand if there's a bit of professional jealousy out there and a sense that maybe I was being favoured for a good performance in 2017. But what they said to me was that they were after a 1 million target. They wanted to get the readership over 1 million registered participants in National Simultaneous Storytime. And in 2018, they did that. They got to 1.0. We got to 1.08 million for Hickory Dickory Dash. And so I just had an extraordinary amount of luck with that. And it's been the biggest boost to my writing career. I was cheeky enough to say that there's a third one, Bar Blue Sheep. How about it? But I think even I'm pleased to say that they moved on to other authors. We've had the alpacas a couple of years ago and the chicken divas this year, and they've been terrific choices. So absolutely thrilled that I had my go. It is just a fantastic day on the children's book calendar.
Question 3. What is your favourite children's book?
What's my favourite children's book? Well, that's a daunting question, a difficult question for any author to answer, and probably for any reader to answer, because there are so many great ones. But the one that immediately came to mind, and the one that I often answer, is one from the late 80s called the 27th Annual African Hippopotamus Race. And I think it's written by an Australian author, and it's a fantastic story of hippos racing down the Zambula River, a fictional river in Africa. And because I was a sport fan as a kid, I remember being just consumed by the idea of this hippo swimming race with all the training and the rivalries and the cheating and the family supporting the hippo, Edward, in his battles against the dastardly Sebastian hippo. And so the 27th Annual African Hippopotamus Race is one that I think I'd name, but there've also been probably more influential books for me. I was a prolific reader as a kid, and my parents were very good at reading to me. The ones that immediately come to mind that I feel have to be mentioned, even if they don't get first place, When the Wind Changed by Ruth Park is a story about a boy who can pull faces, and when he pulls the face, the wind changes. And there's an old saying that if you pull a face and the wind changed, your face will stay in the position, And so the boy pulls that face, and it gets stuck like that, and he's terrifying everybody. I love that story. I often say that stories begin with a what if, and that's just a fantastic what if. Really, a really funny and original story. Other ones a bit older than that one, for older kids by that I mean, and also older in age, is this one called Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim by Robert C. O'Brien. That world and it's a very mysterious and interesting world where rats and mice have been experimented upon by humans, and it changes their intelligence and their abilities. And I just really loved this story. It was read to me by my parents when I was about 12, and I remember thinking it was just an outstanding and captivating world. This one I often answer, we all love Roald Dahl, and of the Roald Dahls, I love this one, Danny the Champion of the World, the most. Because even though Roald Dahl is incredibly good at his kind of fantasy concepts, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, which has something of a real world delivery, but it's still there's a fantasy element in the sense that that the Oompa Loompas aren't real, and that the possibilities of the Chocolate Factory aren't real. But what I love about this one, Danny the Champion of the World, is that you are immersed in a story where it actually feels real. It's a father-son relationship set at a petrol station. And yes, they go on an adventure that is just weird. Like, how do you even come up with this concept of pheasant poaching at the heart of a novel? And pheasant poaching, for those who haven't read it, I mean, that's really stealing pheasants. And so almost no one would come up with stealing as the central premise for a children's book. And yet Roald Dahl has the courage to come up with a it's I guess at the very best you can say it's cheeky and tricky and late night and adventurous, but there is an element that the birds aren't the dads to take, and yet we come out of this book absolutely barracking for Danny and his dad on their pheasant poaching expedition. And so just for the sheer skill of that, of making an anti-hero into a hero, I just always thought this was my favourite Roald Dahl, and I one day want to try to write a book that has the same sort of warmth and heart that exists in the father-son relationship in Danny, the Champion of the World. And to finish with, I just wanted to read you my favourite ever page from a rhyming picture book. And there is no better rhymer in world literature than Linley Dodd. Or maybe I'm being a little bit hard on Julia Donaldson. She is a superb rhymer. But this page from Slinky Malinky is the greatest ever rhyming page in children's literature. So here we go. Crash went the bottles, beep, beep went the clock, row, 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 row went the dogs on the block, on went the lights, bang went the door, and out came the family, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's the page. That's the one I love. And they're the books I love. You can see there's more than one. So many authors end up cheating that question, and I'm just like everyone else.
Question 6. Many of your picture books have been based on nursery rhymes. Have you decided on a rhyme on which to base your next book?
Have I decided on another nursery rhyme? Because it's true, quite a few of my books have been nursery rhyme backstories. And indeed, some of the earlier ones, before I started doing the kind of Mother Goose nursery rhymes, like Hickory Dickory Dash and The Cow Tripped Over the Moon and Bar Bar Blue Sheep, which was the third one in that series. I did a couple of alternative versions, modern retakes on Hans Christian Andersen. So I did The Princess and the Packet of Frozen Peas, and I did The Emperor's New Clothes Horse. So you can sort of see I do have fun with the traditional stories when it comes to making picture books. But the next one in that series of nursery rhyme backstories to follow up Bar Bar Blue Sheep is called Humpty Dumpty Sat on the Slide. And it's coming out in July, so it's only a month away now. And it's a backstory, obviously, to Humpty Dumpty. And it's illustrated again by Laura Wood, so it'll have a similar look to the other ones, except a lovely kind of reddish, ochreish cover. And the idea of this one is that Humpty is not... It started off as a bullying story. It started off where Humpty was... Humpty Dumpty sat on the slide. Humpty Dumpty was rather wide. All the king's horses and all the king's men, all the king's llamas and half of their friends, everyone laughed at the egg on the slide, and Humpty laughed too whilst crying inside, or something like that is how it started. It's now different to that. But the idea was in each scenario that Humpty Dumpty ready to race, Humpty Dumpty fell on his face, and he's starting in a running race. So in each occasion, something kind of goes wrong with for Humpty, and then people laugh at him and point and make fun of Humpty, and it's difficult. He feels like he's being teased. And so it had quite a dark and serious heart, I guess, because bullying was the theme of Humpty Dumpty Sat on the Slide. And one of the jobs the editors and I have gone through is to try to pull that back so it's not so dark and not so serious, because the under fives, if it was being aimed at a sort of a 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 age group, then you can go quite melancholic almost, or really make the point serious, because those kids are appreciating and being talked to about bullying a lot. Whereas you just didn't want to make it too hard on or too sad on Humpty, even if he was going to be redeemed at the end. And in fact, the last line of the book is, Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall, Humpty Dumpty had a great fall. And you might think, oh, hang on, that sounds like suicide. But actually what it is he's jumping off the wall of a jumping castle. Then all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't tear Humpty away from his friend, because he's found a friend, and they jump off the wall of the jumping castle together. So it's a positive resolution, and it's quite a happy book now. The negative experiences for Humpty have been watered down, and the assistance and the redemption from the friend works as a real positive blast. So I think it's a good part. It belongs in the series. It's beautifully illustrated again by Laura, and I can't wait to see it. I haven't got my copy yet, but Humpty Dumpty sat on the slide. Me and Laura would in July.
Question 7. What do you like most about speaking to school groups?
I do speak at a lot of schools, not so much in the COVID era. And in fact, one reason life is pretty tricky for authors at the moment is that we've lost that alternative source of income. So I visit schools a lot and do it through a speaking agency called Booked Out. And especially around Book Week, I go every day, sometimes to 2 schools a day for the 2 weeks or 3 weeks around Book Week. So school visits are a fun and interesting and social and different part of being an author. One of the activities, I always try to make the stories interactive. So talk a little bit about how they come to be, and then, like if I read a story, we try and do a dramatic element to it. So for example, the car tripped over the moon. I always get the kids to look up at the moon and say moon, like a cow would if they saw a moon, and then target it and make an attempt to jump. We all get up on our feet, and especially with the little kids, the preps and grade 1s, have an attempt at jumping over the moon, which can be a lot of fun. And for Hickory Dickory Dash, I've got mouse ears, and the little ones dress up as mice and cats and run around a fictional house. And so school visits are that sort of opportunity to get out and explore the performance art side of things. I think I've got a lot of sympathy for teachers with their ability to control large numbers of people. And certainly after this homeschool period, I do as well. But school visits are, just a great part of being an author, to be able to connect with kids, for them to come up and say, I read and enjoyed your book. You sometimes just get treated like a bit of a rock star too. Kids have got no sense of proportion when it comes to celebrity. So, I might have released a book that sold 12,000 copies or whatever, and not exactly a household name when I stride down the streets of my home suburb. But when I enter Clifton Hill Primary School, it's almost like you're being shared through the place as the emperor. Pieces of paper being thrust in your direction, and they always call you by your full name as well. They don't call me Tony or Mr. Wilson. Tony Wilson, Tony Wilson, Tony Wilson, have you written this book? Tony Wilson, I read your book, The Selwood Boys. So, Tony Wilson really gets a bit of an ego boost from that. And so let's just say that I'm going to continue to visit schools for the foreseeable future.
Question 8. When did you feel like you had made it as an author?
When did I feel as though I'd made it as an author? Well, it's a tricky one. I mean, in your darker moments, you kind of feel like you've never made it, because it's that sort of thing of, you could always do more, or something could go better. And a lot of artistic personalities are slightly depressive, and maybe I'm in that basket as well. But certainly I had a lot of wins quite early. Really, if I reflect on things in a positive light, I could not have been more fortunate, really, with how my early writing career went. I had this book, Players, which was a sporting satire. It was set in the worlds of commercial media and the footy show. It was actually I'd played footy. I'd been a reserves grade footballer at Hawthorn. And so I kind of knew that world. And they often say, write your first novel about the thing you know about. And so I knew about footy. And this was really well received. So, I remember in the weeks and months after it being released in 2005, I went to the Sydney Writers' Festival, and we sort of had 300 or 400 people at the session, and 4 of us sitting across it. And one of the people in my session was Marcus Zuzak, and he just released his book as well. And that was The Book Thief, which some of the adult listeners to this video will know. The Book Thief was on Oprah's book club, and I think it's now sold 20 million copies worldwide or something. I just read Marcus's latest book, actually. Is it called The Bridge of Sighs? No, not The Bridge of Sighs. The Bridge of Somethings, which I very much enjoyed. I should be able to remember the title better. Sorry, Marcus. It was so. But just that idea of sitting at the Sydney Writers' Festival and having all those hundreds of people there, and book signings, and interviews on television, and interviews on radio, and going on the Conversation Hour. I would say that kind of was the, wow, I'm an author. I really did it. I got a book out. And you get that little bit of a thrill every time. Well, I think I've had 20 books now. Every time the book comes for the first time, and the publishers know this, and Scholastic actually wrap up the book for me in a colourful paper and things and make it into a little bit of a present. But when you open a book for the first time, you're always reinvigorated by that feeling of, I created something. I did something that's beyond myself, that will sit in libraries and schools and hopefully be enjoyed by readers. And you kind of get that that's really almost the biggest thrill of being an author, and feeling like you're an author is when you hold the book. And holding the book for the first time is the most special time. So I would say every time I receive a new book, and those early days with players when I was at the Sydney Writers' Festival and other such exciting events. With a special mention, I will mention that when I got a book translated, that also made me feel like a real author. It felt like, I'm really outside of myself here. It's not just me and my family. So that was my first picture book was Grannysaurus Rex, and this one, Bedstosaurus Rex. That must be how you say Grannysaurus Rex in Danish. So let me put that on the list of when I felt like a real author as well, when I got translated. I think that was 2005 or 2006.
Question 9. What was your least favourite thing on Race Around the World?
So I did this show called Race Around the World in 1998, which is so long ago, 22 years ago. And the idea of the show was that 10, and I say kids because we really were kids between 20 and 30 were sent off around the world with a camera, our little mini handy cam, and we had to make a 4-minute documentary in 10 countries around the world. So you'd get 10 days in each country. It was a 100-day trip. And at the end of the 10 days, we'd send back our videotapes because it was pre-fast internet. The internet was in its early years. And we'd send these tapes back in a DHL bag with an edit script, often a 40 or 50-page script that documented every shot we'd taken, every word of every interview. And we'd send it back with time codes saying, cut tape 1 from here to here. And then you add in some montage from these overlay parts of the tape, and editors at the ABC would construct the story. And so in that kind of detailed explanation, I would say that the hardest part of Race Around the World was the sheer god-awful hard work of it. So even though it looked fun, and it was fun, so it was absolutely spectacular, and I'll never do anything like it, that kind of pressure and 1 million people watching on a Monday night, and being propelled from a reasonably unhappy lawyer into being a really happy writer and creator and media person. So life became just so much better because of that show. But the actual act of finding the story, and I ended up approaching it with a real discipline. I've got to find a story in 3 days. I've got to shoot the story in the next 3 or 4 days, and then I've got to edit the story in 3 days. And keep in mind, sometimes you'd be getting all your interviews in Chinese and you couldn't speak a word of Chinese. And so, I'd have to find a backpacker that was bilingual to sit there listening to my audio tapes my videotapes in the hotel room, telling me what they said at each second of the time code. And so, just that level of discipline, of grind, of commitment to getting a good story and product at the end, that's what I would say was the most difficult part of Race Around the World. If I had to say what was It's almost like I'd prefer to say what was the best. I still remember walking at night with 40 cows into the Golan Heights on the border between Israel and Lebanon, and hearing sort of the faint rattle of machine guns, which was terrifying. But it was that sort of like, wow, I'm in the world. I'm in the Middle East. I'm walking with a shepherd, with a cow herder, with 40 cows through a war zone. And I kind of think that I'll never forget that night, And so that, yeah, there were extremes of emotion out there. I think I cried every 10 days.
Question 10. What was the thing you loved most about playing footy?
I loved footy. I played it for 20 odd years, from the age of about 10 to the age of 32. And the thing I loved best about it was that there was a winning and losing element in the moment, which is hard to explain unless you played it. But it wasn't just that there was a game that you were involved in that had a result at the end of it. One thing I really loved and I found exhilarating about footy was that when the ball's in the air and it's coming your way, that there's a kind of immediacy and a pressure that goes with the contest, and that you will very obviously be able to say usually who won the contest and who didn't win the contest. And so I used to find that thrilling and quite addictive, and it kind of even came from playing kick to kick in the yard, where you just really wanted to win the ball each time. So that feeling is one that I've never really gotten in other aspects of life, because life really isn't about micro moments where you win and lose. Even though they may exist, if you're out there seeking them out, I think you'd be a reasonably unpleasant person to be around. So the contest, the thrill of the contest, I would say, was the best and the most addictive part of footy. The things that I also enjoyed were the team elements, and as I went further and further through footy, I got to Hawthorn for 4 years, and I felt there was a real democratic element to footy. So I'd come from private school and I'd gone and done law at Melbourne Uni, and a lot of things had fallen my way, I guess, in a socio-economic sense. And then I got to Hawthorn, and a lot of things had fallen my teammates' way there, in the sense that they were at Hawthorn, they were talented footballers. But I suddenly saw that that there were people from much different walks of life and different backgrounds, but that when we were all teammates and we were all together, then we were kind of bound together. And it didn't really matter about those differences in terms of education and background, and that you weren't really judged on anything much else other than your ability to belong in a group and to be the sort of person that people got along with, and also to play really good footy. So that part of footy, again, was a part that I really enjoyed. And then there was the physical fitness. I was fit then, I was strong then, I miss that now. And there was the setting of goals, and the at the end of the year, not just the winning in the contest, there was the sense of how you went over a season. And you live outside of yourself a little because it's a team. So all those elements combined to make footy one of the real passions of my life, and I still really enjoy watching it. And my daughter plays football, soccer, and I love going to watch her play as well. My son's not so keen on sport, and my other son has cerebral palsy. He's very keen on footy, but we mainly enjoy that as spectators and as home commentators, which Jack and I indulge in a fair bit. And then my little girl, I'm not really sure, she's 5 at the moment. She's not showing a desperate love of sport, but I think we'll try her out with soccer probably. I think she told me this year that she wants to try soccer, and I'd really encourage that. In terms of I've written a lot about sport and a lot about footy, and a lot of the things, I think there's a real romance in sport, and I also think that it has such a significant role in society, and it sometimes, I think, frustrates the artsy people that sport gets such a run, because people are obsessed with it, and sometimes they're not the artsy people, that it's divided. I think that's really unfortunate, because I'm interested in the art of sport, but I think that if you, just as it's incumbent upon fans of sport to try to learn about arts, and you should listen to music, and you should read books, and you should absorb theatre and try to understand dance and opera and all sorts of art forms that we all should be learning about and enjoying. I sometimes feel as though the arts people are so put off by the mainstream popularity of footy that they really get their backs up about it. That's certainly the case with my wife. I wouldn't tell her. This is a secret video. She'll never watch this. So give sport a go. Give footy a go. On the downside of footy, there's the blokiness, I reckon, although it's good to see that women's footy has taken huge strides and it's made a massive difference at a community level, because I reckon the clubs are now males and females in the same environment. It'll really dampen the excesses of blokey footy culture as they come through. So we're hopefully learning a better way with footy. But on the other downside, I would say, is the physical, the body. I can't run, can't really walk without pain. I'm getting my ankle fused because it's arthritic at 47, and so they can't get rid of the pain in it. So, it does take a toll. It did take a toll. So, but footy, what did I love about it? I loved most things about it. It was great. One of the best things, one of the best things that's happened in my life. And that's actually it. That's my 10 questions. So you could ask me that. I've actually enjoyed sitting here in a corner of peace of my house, where the other 5 people are presumably at the door screaming, ready to make me do something in about 5 seconds' time. But this little rest has been fantastic, and I've really enjoyed talking to you. So thank you, Moreton Bay Libraries, and all the best. And I've watched the other people in this series, and some of my favourite authors. It's a thrill to be included, and I hope you've liked my answers.
Thank you for joining us for Yes You Can Ask That with Tony Wilson, brought to you by Moreton Bay Region Libraries.